Welcome to Indie Thoughts, the segment where we talk to independent game developers about the games that they work on. Today we have Charles Griffiths from Cavalier Studios on. So, Charles, thank you tremendously for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, no problem at all. Thanks for having me on.
So, before we get into your experience at Cavalier Games, I'd like to talk a little bit about both your personal background and the background of the studio prior to making Sexy Brutale. I see that your experience in the video game industry was around EA and Lionhead. How did that go? It seemed to influence the creation of your current studio.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For me, so I started out at EA. I went to the first job I sort of applied for in development after university was for a level design job at Criterion, actually. You know, the Burnout guys. They did, well, Burnout and Black and some other things like that. So, and so I got a job offer there, and then that, you know, as one of those things sort of plays out, it then ended up being, because Criterion was part of EA, I then sort of moved into EA instead and onto one of the Harry Potter games. So I was a year at EA and then about 5 or 6 years at Lionhead. I got to work on, you know, a range of things, but I guess the majority of it was Fable and Harry Potter, so a lot of third-person action-adventure kind of thing. So I suppose there was definitely, for me and Tom Lansdale, the technical director, certainly a lot of familiarity with, you know, running around in third person. Always liked that, you know.
Now, it was interesting with you working on, I saw you worked on Fable 2, 3, and I believe you worked on Fable, did you work on the Connect Fable?
Yes, yeah, a lot on that one, yeah.
Now, those games were very heavily influenced by the ability to make choice, and you kind of went the exact opposite direction, sort of, with the Sexy Brutale and creating a world that was entirely orchestrated down to the minute for the purposes of your design. Now, do you think that your experience with such an open world idea with Fable influenced your approach to the Sexy Brutale?
Yeah, I mean, it probably did. It's an interesting question. Because, I think, you know, when you start to do something independently, I suppose for a lot of developers that I talk to and friends of mine and things like that, you definitely react to what you've been doing before, and you react to the bigger studios that you've been part of, you know, in both a positive and negative way. I think, like, you might, you know, if you didn't enjoy a particular part of the studio you worked at, you might, you know, really aggressively go in the other direction, or, you know, so you kind of get a combination of things from it. So, I think actually that, you know, that probably is fair. That probably is an influence, because Fable and Harry Potter and everything, they're sort of quite big and always trying to appeal to quite a lot of people. And certainly aspects of Fable the Journey where you've got kind of, like you say, there's tech trees, a little bit of a tech tree and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And, you know, it certainly feels like sometimes in those games there's choices, they're not always meaningful ones.
Right.
So certainly I think, you know, we definitely felt like, well, I want to, you know, only put things in that really feel like they should be there, like cut it down to all the stuff that is actually, you know, not that the Fable game is bad or anything, because just that is exactly what they're offering. They're offering you quite a big, broad thing. They want you to put a part of yourself into it and kind of make it, you know, make the character your own. And that's what they're really, really good at. But I think not just for reasons of scope and scale, we did definitely want to do something more intimate, something that, you know, it was very much about you playing our character, not being yourself, you know.
Well, and on that note, on you wanting to do your own thing, I know you and another one of the people who worked at Lionhead, you left Lionhead and decided you were going to do your own studio.
Mhm.
And at the beginning, it was very, very small. I saw that during the entire process of creating the Sexy Brutale, it was between 3 and 7 people-ish, sometimes in very small quarters. Now, when
Yeah.
you started out, um, when you started out, you you wanted to create whatever game came to mind rather than the corporate treadmill, not to put too blunt of a point on it.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, I saw that one of your inspirations was the early 90s Rare games where they just took a chance and they ran with it. What
Mm.
other kind of inspirations did you have for your studio starting out?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say that if there was specific inspirations have been more. It feels like a lot of it would be variations on the same theme, you
Hmm.
know. So certainly that aspect of Rare is an enormous inspiration. The fact that they did multiple different genres, the fact that they, brought something original. It felt like they brought something original to everything they did, and it was really, really high quality. And so there's that, and and it feels like maybe the other inspirations are just sort of the same thing expressed in different ways. Because another one would probably be the Hauser brothers and the way they approached Rockstar in the beginning. Even though I think obviously, I mean now it's hard to judge because they're just so successful and so enormous. It's hard to imagine what they would look like if they were small
Right.
anymore. And because
Hmm.
also the way that Rockstar grew out was out of a larger company, so really in many ways like nobody's quite seen what an independent rock star exactly looks like because it's never really been independent, but certainly the attitude of the Hauser brothers has certainly been a big inspiration, even if that perhaps is a less fashionable thing to say now because I know but because yes, obviously hard work and crunch and all that kind of thing, but certainly the way that they speak through their work
Hmm.
primarily, through their work alone. I guess they don't do things like that, like this, which isn't a lot of fun. It's not a lot of fun I mean, it's not fun that they don't do it. Obviously, I enjoy doing this kind of thing. But yeah, it's a shame that, they don't do it. It's sort of a loss for the rest of us.
Hmm.
But I respect the fact that they don't at the same time. Do you know what I mean? They just, for them, it feels like the few interviews they've given, they sort of feel like it takes away from what they're doing if they talk
Right.
about how they make everything. And I can sort of understand that, but I guess what I like is just the confidence that they have in what they do. That they do it, they give it to people, they let people draw their own conclusions about their work. They don't sort of they neither furiously defend it when it's under attack, nor do they sort of bang on about it and sort of blow their own trumpet kind of thing. It's so yeah, I like the fact that they wanted to do things differently. It's been very, very successful for them, and they sort of pursued their own vision from the get-go.
Yeah, they just kind of let the conversations happen. And don't get me wrong, this kind of thing, there are no expectations when I have these kind of interviews, but it is a delight to have these one-on-ones with the people who are involved in these games because a lot of these games, Sexy Brutale is a great example where there is so unique of a premise coming into it that while maybe not wanting to pry every possible detail out of the people who created it because of the whole death of the author concept of we interpret it how we want to interpret, it's still nice to hear both what the creators think of what people think of it and where the creators are willing to share their insight, which is where we are now. So,
Hmm. Yeah, no, sure, yeah, no, I absolutely get it.
but moving into the Sexy Brutale in and of itself, I saw that this game you started prototyping in approximately 2013, and this is a game that absolutely screams of iterative development.
Hmm.
Um, there, you can almost see while playing it how each successive murder you're solving. While I was reading a lot of the design interviews you guys were giving, you talked about how you started with an idea, and then as the game kept growing out, you kept building on to what the story would be and building on to what the characters would be. And the idea of this perfectly orchestrated mansion just kind of came together in a really powerful way. So
Mhm.
I saw that some of your inspirations were things like Majora's Mask, which you can definitely see. And I also saw a couple like the Gregory Horror Show and the Tulip in the Moon. Those I'm not as familiar with, but
Mhm.
how did you take those inspirations when you were starting the development of the game and kind of make them your own?
Yeah, so it kind of links back to the question you asked about did Fable and a reaction to that kind of inspire it? Because to go back to the 2013 period,
Hmm.
in contradiction to what I was saying about making a more intimate small experience, when we started out, it was actually a bigger idea
Hmm.
of it was more of a simulation type thing. The thread that's always run through it has been the idea of characters moving schedules and having routines, that kind of thing. But originally, it was more of a sort of wider simulation. And we worked on that for a while, and it just didn't like it just feels like sometimes there's that bit that people talk about a lot where sort of there's you trying to talk to the game and make the game, and then there's the bit where the sort of game starts to talk back to you a bit. And it
Right.
was just the bits that were the most fun were always just related to these people doing their scheduled activities, just
Hmm.
like a guy who left, stubbed out fags all around the village and things like that, and crunched up newspapers, like weird things like that. And because we kept coming back to being like, that's the most characterful, interesting stuff, um, that started to make us think about going in the total opposite direction of being like,
Hmm.
rather than this sort of more simulated aspect, actually, what if we, just did the full choreography thing? And it was something that had sort of floated around as a possibility, but we'd sort of been afraid of because it was like, but the one thing we know we can't do is do the full Groundhog Day thing, where
Hmm.
it's everybody is there, it's all identical, and then we've got to weave the puzzles through it and sit them all on top of each other in one single day. That was the sort of thing. It was there, floating in the distance as a kind of, I guess, if you wanted to do the extreme, that's what you do. But it was
Right.
always like, yeah, but we could. I mean, that would get pretty crazy trying to have all the puzzles sat on top of each other and everything. But it was in the beginning, at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. That was when it was just one of those major changes where it's like, actually, I think there's a better game here. There's a more interesting game here, and it's that game.
Hmm.
And that's where everything then became Majora's Mask, Gregory Horror Show. It was just kind of leaning into the things that was like, well, actually, we love all that stuff as well. Like, really, really love that. And
Right.
maybe, the game shouldn't be sort of tapping into these kind of feelings over here. It should actually be tapping into more what those games were tapping into.
Hmm.
So, that was, I mean, that was a big change. The only real big change the game went through like that. But that was a pretty big one. So to say that we started out with the Majora stuff like is true when we were making what obviously became the Sex Brutale, but it's just, I guess it's worth noting that there was a stage before that
Hmm.
where it's kind of like an even bigger, wider, more sim version of Sex Brutale. Um, yeah, and then in terms of those specific titles, yeah, Majora's Mask is sort of the more well-known one because it's Zelda and things like that. But
Right.
the probably a bigger inspiration was Gregory Horror Show, which was a lot less well-known, a lot less popular, and didn't because it had a lot of problems. Like it was a really really interesting game, but the design of it was just really unwelcoming in places, and lots and lots of very convoluted systems and things like that. So but it was just the idea of it. When you fall in love with the idea of something more than the actual thing itself, like when you sort
Hmm.
of hear about a film or you see a trailer and you just think, oh, I just absolutely love that. And then the actual thing itself, it's just not great. But the dream in your head is even better, and you sort of hold on to that more than that. And that's sort of what Gregory Horror Show was like. And Moon RPG Remix is a really interesting game, and it's interesting, it's fascinating just to read about it because it's never been translated.
Hmm.
So it's only ever been released in Japanese, and it's not a game that you can play, without having a good grasp of the language that's being thrown around. So there are some people still working on translating it. That'd be cool if they ever did. But yeah, even just reading about the Wikipedia entries and things like that, that's just like a really interesting, weird game. So yeah, they were just, I suppose, they were influences to the extent of people that had done things in the same area. But that's about all. They weren't guides to solving any problems in that way, because we were still, finding our own problems to solve. But they were other things that had the right mood. That sense of these people moving around the house, the postman in Majora's Mask's feeling of them being like little living characters having their own schedules. So that's all they was, similar things capturing the right mood for us to utilize.
The Sexy Brutale was definitely a game that was about its characters, which really comes home in the final leg of the narrative. But we'll get to that in a bit. One of the things that I thought was interesting was how the game seemed to iteratively build. Both every murder you solved gave you a new power, but it also opened up more of the house. So at the end of the game, you talked about how you guys were concerned with building an entire mansion where every puzzle was stacked on top of each other, which kind of came to a head in the penultimate murder that you were solving, where you had to go around the entire house through approximately 4 different iterations. That was my favorite murder to solve personally, because you thought that you knew what the combination needed to be to keep the 2 people from getting incinerated in the furnace, but if you hadn't thoroughly checked out the house, then you hadn't actually iteratively solved it, because you go there, you solve it the way you think you're going to solve it, then you see him die. Well, what did I mess up? So now you have to actually follow them around. It was the payoff the entire game had been building for, and that was hands down my favorite murder in the entire game, which is kind of a morbid thing to say, but
yeah.
Do you get a lot of feedback on people saying which one of these are their favorite to solve, or?
It's funny. Well, you get a lot of feedback on what was their least favorite one to solve.
Well,
That's for sure. Yeah, but yeah, I guess the bits that people struggled with, end up, or maybe you just focus on them more or remember them more. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I often get the impression that Willow is pretty popular all
that
round.
would be my second favorite,
People
yeah.
seem to draw a lot of pictures of Willow, or do more costumes of Willow and things like that. So I think, which again, makes me think about it's just the more intimate you go, even in a game that's already quite intimate, the more people seem to respond to it, because of course Willow, I suppose, is a slight exception in that she is going around on her own quite a lot. So it's kind of interesting that people like her, so much, because she's a little bit more on her own, and it's a kind of it's a suicide, and it's all very kind of like closed in on her, and that seems to be one of the ones that people like. But yeah, I suppose like she has quite a colourful little area, and there's occult voodoo things going on, and she has one of the powers that I like, because it's another that one's like very, very clearly an ability that lets you sort of peel the onion of the house and have it be revealed that there's actually even more going on before, and a fun way of putting a new context on some stuff you've already seen. So that's an example of like some of the little markers, the little flags in the ground that really guided our way through the game. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff that comes out of as you're developing it, but there's a few things that you sort of cling to from the beginning, and you're building towards them. And the way she dies and the way that is utilized as a sound across the house, that'd be something that was really, really early. We knew we had to build around that and towards that. and the conversation that she has in the corridor that very clearly
Yes.
doesn't make a lot of sense until you have her power, and then you know, hopefully it's just like a nice joke and you see a different context and it, you know, so yeah, those would be two clear examples of something that we sort of had early and worked towards them.
Those were a lot of really impressive aha moments because, like you said, in the corridor, the first time I observed that conversation, it was very confusing to me because it didn't make a lot of sense. And then after you solve Willow's murder, you're inherently drawn to where Willow is to see what all she's encountering, but in the process of following her around, you do find all that additional context. For example, when you follow Tequila after she leaves that conversation, you previously weren't able to proceed for reasons you weren't aware of. But because you finished Willow's, now you've opened up the context. What I found happening in each of these murders was as I was trying to investigate how to solve, change things for the better, I would find an area that was locked off by something that was very obviously a skill I didn't have. So not only was I being directed what I was supposed to do by given the boundaries of what I had, but it gave me an indication of where I should be going next because it seemed to tie in. We saw an early version of this when you were saving Trinity, and she was able to do things that you weren't able to do, and it was very obvious you weren't able to do them. But once you finished that, you got her direct abilities, and then you realized how many more places that tied into. So a question, and I'm curious, I'm guessing it's going to be one way and not the other, but the ghosts is a great example. Some people might think that you start the game with a general rounded idea of what you want it to be, and then kind of peel it back from there to determine what you want to give the players. But the ghosts feel like a good example of where you had a solid idea and then realized you could add more things into it to help fully flesh out the house to the player. Was that the direction you took with this?
Yeah, I'd say that, yeah, the ghosts are a really good example of that, because the idea of the ghosts and unlocking a visual aspect to the house, like, yes, that's the bit where if you step back before we, you know, early days, it's the kind of thing, that's the sort of idea that you can have on paper or have as a thing of being like, yeah, you know, that's a post-it on the wall, that's what we're going for. We're going for the power that unlocks a visual layer to the house, and that you know, then in time becomes like, yeah, okay, so it's gonna be this ghost thing, it's gonna have this whole occult aspect thing. So that, yeah, you start there, and then yes, that'd be a good example of something where if you've got a good power, if you've got something that is actually a multi-use tool, you know, that's what we're going for. You want to try and avoid the things that are single-use lock and keys. So that's always a challenge. You know, did we get every part of that perfect? No, but you know, that was certainly the aim. Is we want to get something that has multiple uses, and the ghost is the good example of that, because, like you say, yes, we started with that, and then over time you realize what more you can add, you know, so once you've sort of got the skeleton, it's go, oh, actually, you know, we could add this here and we could add this here, and in this room there could be a ghost that you don't know about, and then that's like another little piece here or there. Oh, that, you know, if that guy can deliver this bit of content or this, you know, necessary thing that we need to do, you know, could that role be fulfilled by a ghost? Then it might be a case of, no, not that one. It's not appropriate for a ghost to be the delivery mechanism because of these other reasons. So is there another thing? So yeah, definitely. That's, you know, I think that's, you know, that's a good unlock or a good power, is something where you can immediately think of the big important examples, and then also, you know, that it's good enough. It's going to keep delivering for you as you develop the game, because it's going to be something that provides the opportunities.
So one question I did have, because you'd mentioned, and I won't get too much into the specifics of this one, you'd mentioned that there were some puzzles that people had mentioned they had had trouble with. Now, the only thing that I found at any point was early on in the game when I was trying to save Trinity and Clay. I accidentally saved them. So I was just kind of wandering around and I flipped a switch and suddenly they were saved, and I wasn't really sure why. That presented me with an issue when I was moving forward because I wasn't sure how I saved them, so I wasn't sure what the restraints on me were moving forward.
Yeah.
Did you notice any similar feedback to that, either in play tests or from other people while they were playing it? Because that was the only example that jumped to mind where I accidentally stumbled into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a good example, and it's the most common problem for sure, like definitely. And we were aware of it, and the casino is just a particularly tough one for a bunch of reasons. Like it's actually for a second puzzle, like the whole game really unlocks at that point in a way that it was difficult for us to make sure it wasn't overwhelming, because you sort of go from a very contained situation and a puzzle that we've really made sure you're quite contained, because otherwise we tried dumping players in the middle of the house in order to, because if you're a curious person, it's like, oh, that should be so exciting, that should be so interesting, isn't it wonderful to just start in the middle and you can see all these things playing out around you, and it's just one of those fine balancing acts. You go, well, yeah, for some people they love that sort of really hardcore unguided experience. Most people don't, and as a player, I wouldn't be one of those people either, to be honest. Like, I prefer a well-designed on-ramp, and that's the challenge. Like, bring the person into the game, make it interesting. But you're always trying to walk a fine line between too on rails, too dictated. It's very boring. If you go too far the other way, it's just overwhelming and people bounce off it. So we had this very, very controlled early scenario, and then the casino just gets a lot bigger quite fast. So that's a tricky one, and it's a two-parter, and we're also trying to teach you about the ideas of things happening in parallel. So you've got two characters sort of within it pursuing their own story. And yeah, the combination of sort of trying to make sure everybody sees these things, but put the correct gates and restraints on the puzzle, while at the same point not making it too difficult to execute and things like that. But yeah, the upshot, the problem with it is that you do get people that because it is possible, people naturally interact with stuff and click things and everything like that, of course. And it's possible in combination to solve it before seeing it. I mean, that's possible with many of them, but it doesn't happen because of the way people take in the information and everything. But it's certainly that's a more common problem in the casino. So in terms of other things that people find difficult, I mean, the one, your favorite one with Thanos and Aurum, that they would probably be the other most difficult one for people.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, again, it's just another point where it really widens out. You have to explore the whole house and things like that. And this is the whole thing, going back to trying to make an intimate game. We had more puzzles like that, sort of like bringing in the whole house and everything like that, but it gets quite hardcore because you're already on a timer, and then you get this problem of people are almost solving the puzzle, they're almost getting it right, but then they're running out of time, and now they've got to start the whole process again, and all the variables are up in the air, and they start to question everything again. It's like, was I on the right path and I just didn't quite get there? Or was I on the wrong path entirely? And by the time they've pursued a bit more of that, or figured out that they're sort of running out of time again, so you end up kind of, players getting slightly lost and frustrated in a thing of like, I don't know if I'm on my way to executing the solution, or if I'm just sort of pursuing entirely the wrong avenue. So that can get very tricky. So, we were careful with how we were going to do that, and the Thanos and Aurum, that's why they come much later on in the game for that reason. But nevertheless, that is where I think some people also find that's a bit of a difficulty spike too, because suddenly it just requires this sort of revisiting of old puzzles, and and it does require a little bit of timing. Like you can't be completely sluggish about it. You do sort of need to be getting around at a speed to get it done. But not too fast, I think. But so yeah, I'd say those are the two ones where you've got, and they represent opposite ends of the spectrum, right? You've got a casino situation that in some ways is perhaps too easy, and the Thanos and Aurum one, which some people was too hard. And that is, that is the problem with a puzzle game in general. We've heard it all, we've seen it all. We have, good reviews. It's a game that was, critically well appreciated and
Hmm.
everything. Had some nominations and awards and things. That's all lovely. So you'd say by those metrics, okay, it's not a terrible game. That's nice. But nevertheless, you'll still hear a bunch of people say these puzzles are way too hard, and you'll still hear a bunch of people say these puzzles are way too easy.
Well,
So,
and that's
difficulty is a hard thing to get right.
And I thought you guys made clever use of visual cues as far as the direction you're supposed to be taking. Because in the first controlled murder that you were solving, the one with Reginald, you made it clear that when you encountered Reginald the first time, it showed the image of who you were saving. So that was an establishment of when you encounter the person you're supposed to be saving, it shows who you're supposed to be following. And then
Yeah.
from that point, it shows on the map, as long as you keep track of where a person is, you can actually watch where they progress through the house. So, and then the final part, and this is where the casino one, even though I lucked into figuring it out, it established that the clock gave an indication of when the people would die. So I knew the restraints. So you'd created through just three simple visual cues what my constraints for this murder were. And another thing you mentioned was not having a whole lot of time for the more hardcore puzzles. That was kind of what I really enjoyed because with the Aurum and the Thanos one, I I ended up after I messed it up the first time, I would just follow them around the house so I could see what locations they went to and then follow them specifically to try to figure out what their interactions were that were causing me to mess it up. That's why that was my favorite one because that felt like you were really nailing the clockwork part of it. Like
Yeah.
everything was coming together in a real Rube Goldberg way. And
Hmm.
that was why that was my favorite puzzle because that hit everything in the house. And while I understand you said difficulty, impossible to make everybody happy, it just
Hmm.
is. But that was the kind of puzzle that I absolutely adored in that game. So
Cool.
that's just what jumps out. The Willow
Yeah.
one is similar to that to me because you can't get it the first time. By the
Mm.
nature of how it's set up, you have to follow her, realize where the cues are, solve them ahead of time. That one takes two or three iterations to get through. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
one, that's
Yeah.
where this game really, really jumped out to me,
Hmm.
where you had to use the mechanics. You couldn't just get lucky every time. So,
Yeah. Yeah, because it really is. The casino is kind of an exception on that thing, and the only reason why I'd say we didn't, do some major redevelopment of that one, because not only have we sort of done it several times and everything, and we're sort of happy with that as it was. The
mhm.
thing about the casino was that yes, even if you do accidentally get through that part, you are gated in the same sort of Willow way by the fact that you can't move on any further without understanding Trinity's story. Because the
Mhm.
most likely thing is that you sort of do it without fully understanding, or the most likely way, if you've made the mistake or if you've accidentally, solved it, the likelihood is it was probably because you didn't see Trinity's part and you sort of solved the clay part.
You
Uh,
got it.
yeah. So, and then at least, so the reason why, we felt like, I hope it'll be okay is because there is that sort of safety net of the fact that in order to then move on, in a way, all you've done is sort of split the puzzle.
Mhm.
If you had the ideal experience and sort of took in the whole casino and all strands of it and then solved the puzzle, you would probably move through the door pretty quickly. If in the sort of slightly less than ideal case where you didn't see Trinity's full story and you did accidentally kind of complete it, you then have to take in Trinity's story anyway. You've now
Mhm.
just moved that half of the puzzle to how am I going to get through this door?
That
So that that was the reason why we sort of felt like that would be okay. And then yeah, and in terms of the feedback and little visual bits, like that is an example of just pure iteration in a way because you're just kind of looking at you've got the raw material, the puzzle is the right thing, the sort of the game mechanics are the right thing, and then you just see people missing things, and then it's like, oh, how can we bring that out? How can we sort of I always think like there's no there's no nobility in obscurity, you know.
Right.
There's nothing like, if you've done the right thing, if the, you know, if the game is good, the mechanics are good and stuff like that, don't be ashamed to communicate it, you know. But there is a whole breed of game developer and things like that that sort of see HUD items and GUI and you know, obvious icons and things like that. They sort of see those things as the enemy, as like compromising your sense of immersion, and oh, aren't they terrible and blah blah blah. But you know, I think the developers and stuff that we really like and everything they do skew more that way. You know, Kojima or Rockstar Games or Rare Games and everything like that. They're aware of what they are. They're not afraid of it, and they'll use every tool that they have at their disposal to communicate what they're trying to communicate with you. So, you know, we have no shame with having a little clock and the mask icons on, and you know, when you see the character, the menu comes up, it reveals the thing. You know, yes, we have the clock pulsing when the time is getting near their death, and yeah, you know, all those little bits of feedback, because that's, you know, feedback and clarity and you understanding, you know, what's going on is an integral part of getting immersed in it and enjoying it. So.
Now, speaking of getting immersed and enjoying it, one of the things I hear consistently praised, and I'd have to agree with this, is the musical selection for this game. Now, the musical selection, it skews heavily toward the electro swing genre. Now, was this a conscious decision that you guys made because of the aesthetic tied with the fact that there is a heavy rhythm component to the music, which ties into the game? There's a lot of musical cues in the game. So I'm curious, just because this is one of those games that if you guys made a 2 LP fold out with a map of the mansion in the middle, that's something I would buy instantly. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of feedback on that. To the best of my understanding, the only physical version is there is a CD that came with one of the physical releases, I think. And I know there's a lot of logistics involved in making a vinyl, but hope springs eternal. So.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, yeah. In terms of music things, yeah. So I mean, yeah, the Full House edition on PS4 has a manual in it, which is sort of more than a manual, because that's actually, you know, that's got a written statement from all of us. It was just kind of like, you know, it felt like a nice thing to do. It was, you know, so that's got a you know, little bit that a lot of us wrote about the development game, and then it's got the soundtrack CD, and then it's got an art book. I think that's everything. Yeah, and people can get the soundtrack on Steam and things like that. But yeah, I mean, the electro swing and the whole sound of it, that, you know, my brother James, the narrative director for the game, that was the thing that, you know, he had a clear vision for the sort of world and the name of the casino, all that. It all sort of feeds in. You know, the Sex Brutale is a you know, obviously pretty bold kind of name, and the electro swing was sort of part of that. That was always part of the vision for the music, was do that. So we had, you know, James was working with some really great composers, Lowrider down in Brighton, and it was I mean, that I think was for, you know, I don't know if Lowrider would say the same thing, but I think that was a really good musical project, because you know, usually you have to make quite ambient sort of music, and especially you take a game like Fable or some kind of big open world thing, and they all sort of sound, you have to have that kind of, it can't be too in your face, it can't be too, you know, non-existent, so you've got this kind of very ambient thing. And again, it was just leaning into what our game was. It was once we realized we were going to do the full Groundhog Day thing, that was something where it was like an obvious win, was just thinking, wow, so we can actually, if nothing is going to interrupt this. And that was hard to maintain. Because there are other things, you know, even as simple as a pause menu or things like that, it all plays in. It's just like, right, well, what the hell are we doing with the music? And, you know, is the music going to change for this reason, that reason, when the day's resetting, if you get interrupted here? And, you know, so once we'd made that rod for our own backs, it was like, well, you know, now we just have to stick with it. And nothing could, if we were going to say, right, the music is going to be completely synced to the action, then that's it. It's got to be, you know, nothing can stop the music playing, if the action's taking place. And then at least I think then it was a cool composing project, because unlike a lot of other games, we could send and talk to Lowrider and send them videos of just being like, right, we have, put together a video of Willow's entire day. We've just got a camera following Willow the entire day, and not just her, but here is it. So we would split the video, so they would get a video of the 4 simultaneous CCTV style images that is the whole day for all the characters involved in that, for the 9 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So they could look at that and they could score it like a movie and be informed by all the other scenes. So if actually things are a little bit quiet for Willow here, but something really interesting is going on with the ghost or whatever here, or same with Trinity in the casino, they could score to that, So maybe they want to make the whole thing follow a certain thread, but yeah, it's just great because suddenly you had music that could emphasize every little point of action, every little bit of rising tension, or every bit of worry or danger or anything. We could start to bring that all out. And yeah.
The music, the reason I wanted to call it out is because the music is often something, like you said in Fable, that can enhance the atmosphere, but the music felt integral to this game, both because of the cues and the different directions that the characters could take, and the fact it had to sync up so perfectly with everything that was happening. In addition, it's just a really good soundtrack. So it was something that I had to bring up.
It's great, yeah. No, it's good. I mean, yeah, I'm glad people like it. It was, yeah, we liked it.
But moving on to what will be the last major point here, and I believe your brother could be able to speak maybe a little stronger to it just because he's the narrative director, but I remember I read in interviews that you all kind of wore different hats because of how small the studio was. I would like to talk about the plot of the game, because the first time I played it, I found it to be really interesting. However, the second time I played it, I picked up on a lot of stuff I missed. And the details there I found were really incredible. Some of the small things, like I didn't notice the first time. I just thought maybe your main character of Lafcadio, maybe he was just uneducated, because when he was checking paintings, he would describe them as I would. And I don't know paintings at all. So he'd be like, oh, there's some weird woman with an earring. Or they're just, the way he would describe them was somebody who wasn't familiar with art. And then as I replayed it and realized the whole thing, and knowing that the whole thing was in his head, I began to question how many of these things were just because it was what he could remember and mentally project. So it wasn't that this necessarily was him not knowing the picture. This was just the best recollection of it and how he would explain it to somebody as he was actually doing. So when you were building the narrative of the game, were you trying to build as many of these little details indicating what the deeper story was? Because the first time I played, it felt like I got a lot of the story in the last real chapter. And it wasn't until I replayed it that I realized how much foreshadowing there was leading up to that last chapter, because I was so focused on the murders. There were little details around the mansion that I had neglected to pay attention to. So what kind of feedback do you get on that? Or what was your intent?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something where, yeah, we've got lots of good feedback on the, the feel of the way the story does come through in the end, and how it's been built up over time. But that was something that it definitely felt like, we have to get that right. I think we just felt like there's no... we really, really felt like if we're doing the Groundhog Day thing, if we're doing the idea of you looping through this and there being this small set of characters, there really is no excuse. We have to have these details right. Because what it isn't is a case of, like, well, there's this corridor, any corridor, pick any random bland corridor. That is not going to be a corridor that a player runs through and then never sees again.
Right.
Because, when you're making a giant third-person action adventure or something, especially if it's not part of the hub world or something like that, you do, this content is, to be fair, it's kind of roller coastery, right? You're going to sort of pass through this, and you won't be revisiting this area, so it's kind of like water under the bridge, and you want to make it good, and you want to make some details, but it's definitely the amount of effort that's going to go into it is sort of proportional to the amount of time you think a player is going to spend there. And if it's a piece of corridor that's going to be run through and in an unrevisitable area, it's unlikely to have a particularly lovable detail in it, because everyone involved is going to know, well, who's going to see this? It's probably pretty unlikely people are going to see this. They're only going to have this one chance to see this. But in a game where we are encouraging people and, to just live in this house and get to know this house incredibly well, it just felt like there was almost no level of detail that would be too much. So the writing was an opportunity for James to put that into it, because even when it's still a third-person game, you're sort of looking at it as a dollhouse and everything like that, there's a limit to what you can even get across in the art assets. The game is very text-heavy, and it is, it's a game for people that, kind of enjoy reading and visual novels and stuff as well, because it's not all voice acted. There is a lot of text in it. And the text can, we like that kind of text-based game as well, and it can add more than a piece of art can, because it's more than just, okay, well, there's a vase and it's sort of pretty and it's on a desk, or there's a picture and it's kind of okay and it's on a wall. When it's a game that actually has written descriptions, it's an opportunity for you to actually make it a lot more than that. You can make it more than the art asset. So, we were able to pore over the game, and James was able to add those details. And I think more even than the work he did on the actual descriptions themselves, there's actually just the sort of tone of it, and that's something that you do get good feedback on. Is sort of it has a kind of a darkly humorous kind of tone running through quite a lot of it. I think when people look back and they read some of the things there, it's kind of there's humor there, but there's also quite a lot of melancholy, because the actual, when people play it through to the end, they sort of see what that's all about. So yeah, it's I like the fact that the writing is able to do more, is able to actually do more than visuals alone can, like good writing can and should do.
And that's what I found the writing, because as I was playing the game, I found myself thinking, there's a giant voodoo fish. I'm not 100%. I mean, we're in a casino murder mansion. I accept that there is some degree of suspension of disbelief, but some of these things just seem a degree too far. And then in the very last chapter, when the antagonist basically breaks it all down, saying, of course this is a degree too far. You think any of this could have actually happened? It just kind of felt like he was successfully slapping me in the face. And that really kind of got brought to a head in the final puzzle, where they're making you rewatch the mistake you made that killed all your friends over and over and over again, but you still have to use your power in a creative way. And I thought that was a really clever way to tie the beginning of the game, where you had a very small murder mystery, to the end of the game, where, yes, it's where everything happened, and this character that you've seen jumping out the window the entire game, you now know who that is. But this is still a very small murder mystery, and it's still solving all the problems at the same time. So I thought that was a really clever bookend right there. And one thing that I will say, and you'll have to provide me a little insight if you can, is up until I beat the game, I didn't know how to use the key that gets you to the demonic card dealer. I'd completely missed that detail. And you kind of get the idea as you're building up all these different cards that there is perhaps, and I think there is some dialogue in the game that alludes to the fact that your character used to gamble before you realize your character is almost every character in this game. A buddy of mine who played through it said he felt like the gambling subplot, the gambling addiction, kind of seemed a little out of nowhere for him. But I'm positive there were more details involved in there. Besides the cards, what other details jumped out to say this was a mistake? Like, I'm trying to find for him where the background details were, because I know they were there.
Well, I mean, I guess for example, with that, with the gambling, I think it's less about the gambling addiction. It's less about the past nature of the character.
Mm-hmm.
It's more that kind of thing is tied up in just the mistake that he makes. The
Mm-hmm.
mistake that he makes is a gamble. So it's part of, that
Uh-huh.
it's part of, really just leaning into that for the collectibles and doing that kind of thing was just, and the fact that, yeah, I mean, people call it, one thing we sort of didn't anticipate was people seeing that as an alternate ending. And I guess we were stupid not to see that coming because we did roll the credits after it.
I
But
I thought it was an alternate ending. Yeah.
yeah, so like, yeah, and we never really, yeah, we never thought of it as an alternate ending because it's not meant to replace the actual ending in any way, shape, or form. Um, it was, I think, because in our heads, it was always something that people did after they'd completed the game.
Mm-hmm.
Putting the credits on was just sort of a way of bookending it. Because yeah, we didn't. To us, there's only one ending, which is the actual ending. That's the only ending that provides any actual closure. That other ending, what people see as an ending, I don't think we sort of really thought of as an ending, as more just, I get. Well, I mean, I guess like it's fair enough if people want to see it as an ending. That is completely fair enough. It's not for me to take away that interpretation of it. But I think we just saw it in a kind of a sort of epilogue-y sideways thing, or the other route that you can take, which is denial, and to continue along that path.
And that's why I saw it as an alternate ending, because you're right. It's a kind of thing, those cards, they are meant as a collectible, so it's not something that most people would get on their first playthrough. So once you know the narrative conclusion of the story and you go around and collect all of these cards, at this point you recognize that you're in this construction of your mind because of what you did, and go taking this representation of your past mistakes to a person who is admitting to you, to a demonic character who's admitting to you, yeah, we're going to do a thing you shouldn't do, and then you just slide into denial. Yeah, it
Mm.
kind of seems like you have to do a lot of work to get the bad ending, but that was the thematic point to me, was you'd work so hard to get over it, and then so you have to put in all this work to go back into your old bad habits. Like,
Mm.
you're defeating the work that you've done the whole game. That's
Yeah,
how I saw it.
yeah, yeah. I suppose the only reason why we sort of recoiled from the idea of it being an ending was just because we would hate to think that anyone would actually sort of do that first and
No.
consider that to be an ending, because as an ending, it's interesting. It's something that you can do in a video game. It's what makes the medium great, because
Hmm.
you can sort of add this thing that is a way for you to look at the alternate branch, a way for you to look at this kind of epilogue thing while not being deprived of the actual ending. What it isn't is, sort of heavy rain, choose your own adventure thing where somebody gets left with that ending. Because don't get me wrong, I think, we think as a narrative that would be an unsatisfying, not properly executed ending. So we consider the ending to be
Hmm.
the ending that we narratively believe is uh, you know sort of the right ending for the story. It's the only story with actual, that's the only one with sort of closure, but the other one is legitimately there as, like, yeah, I suppose, it is sort of this alternate branch. It is just a way of emphasizing the same point, just sort of giving
Hmm.
you a peer into the path you could have gone down. But so that's, yeah, I guess, it's all terminology at the end of the day. I think it was just, yeah, the particular word ending. We were like, ooh, I don't know, but I don't think people. But like you say, I don't think most people actually. I don't think people get there first.
Yeah, I
It's like
would
you
be
sort of,
shocked.
yeah, exactly. You complete the game, and then if you want to clean up the collectibles, then the reward is you get this little insight there. But
Mhm. Now, this game had a very strong sense of closure at the end. However, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to ask this, I know there is some media that leads to the expansion of this universe. Example, there was a comic that gave a little backstory.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the comic. Yeah, that was in the PS4 box version. Yeah, I forgot about that.
And I know there's even more information about this world on the website. Do you guys have any ideas for it? It doesn't seem like there will be a Sexy Brutale 2 just because I have absolutely no idea how you would capture that lightning again. Like that was a very contained package. But do you have any ideas for how to expand on the universe moving forward?
I mean, the Sex Brutale in particular, I think this is where, again, it's what we like as players and people, and people that like games and things like that. But it is very counter to what people do these days, and it's counter to a lot, a lot of what people would consider sensible business decisions. But like you say, the game is aggressively contained
Hmm.
because I don't find, and we don't find those endings satisfying. The endings that are just clearly setting up a sequel, we don't think they're very good endings, and it seems it's more and more obvious when games are coming out where it's just they're not interested in being games really, they're interested in being franchises, and tacking on as many things as they possibly can, or prequels or expanding sideways and everything like that. So I don't know, never rule anything out, but um, it's the case of it is what it feels like, right? Like you say, contained. We're going for something where it shouldn't feel like we've set ourselves up to do the Sexy Brutale. It shouldn't feel like that. It should feel like it was there and it existed and it was the story we wanted to tell with the characters that were there. But of it, right, is if people
Right.
like it, it's a nice place to stay. But actually, the really sad thing is that all those people aren't there. So it's
And
kind of
and that's actually, I think, though I had no illusions of there potentially being another Sexy Brutale, because one of the last lines in the game is "Time to move on, old man." Like, oh, that gets me. That gets me right there. So while, like I said earlier, if you made a game of just super hardcore of these time puzzles, I would be down. But the story is done. Like you've wrapped up everything. So while it would be interesting from a expanded universe perspective, I do feel like you guys told the story you wanted to tell. Yeah.
yeah, and that is true. And I think I think to revisit that kind of thing, and do that kind of thing again, like that would be, it's not like we don't have lots of ideas and things for that or how that'd be cool to explore. But I think, sort of go back to where we started with the inspirations of Rare and, being able to do different things. And that's what really inspires me is if we can go on to do other things, and if we could, if people consider the Sex Brutale to be a good example of that kind of game, then I would love to be able to do that for other kinds of game as well. That would be great because more and more people, find themselves for all sorts of reasons and totally valid reasons, just sort of specializing and specializing and specializing. And I don't know, maybe it's too optimistic, but I would love to believe that, designers, writers, coders, we can turn our hands to other kinds of game as well.
I'm confident, but I'm just recording a podcast. I have no idea how difficult it is. So, that being said, we're just about at our time limit. Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap this up?
I would just like to apologize for being so hard to pin down and get through
No.
this. It's just been a busy, busy time. But no, I mean, thanks a lot for all the questions. I mean, really good questions. Ones that have made me think about yeah, exactly sort of where we started with some of it. But Yeah, yeah, no, it's been good. I think that's everything. I hope that yeah, I hope that anybody that hasn't picked it up is encouraged to.
hmm I recommend this game to just about anybody who will sit still, and no worries on the scheduling problem. I understand how it is being across in a different country.
Yeah,
This
sure.
I've interviewed people from Sweden and Norway and all over, so this is nothing new to me. But
Right.
I appreciate you taking the time, and I wish you the best in all your future endeavors. Thank you very, very much, Charles.
Thanks very much. Cheers, and all the best to you too.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Cool. You too. Catch you later.
Later. Have you played the Sexy Brutale? What did you think of its unique combination of aesthetic, music, and gameplay? Let us know. But until next time, this has been Indie Thoughts on Co-Opinions.